There was a minister who had a 5-year-old daughter. And she noticed that every Sunday before he began his sermon, that he would bow his head and pause. And so she asked him one day, "Dad, why do you do this?" Well, he was really proud that she was taking notice of his message and so on. And he said, "Well, honey, I'm just bowing my head and asking God to help me preach a good sermon." To which she responded, "Well, why doesn't he do it? Why doesn't he do it?" So I'm going to pause for a moment and I'm going to bow my head because I have something really important that I want to share with you today. And I'm going to need some help doing it. So if you give me just a moment. You see, I understand that it's not all up to me. Being just one of the ordinary people, I need God's help. And that is precisely the point of my message today. That's why I needed to bow my head. And you'll be the ones to decide whether he helped me or not. Well, Jesus, as Alicia pointed out, called some disciples. She told us the story, and we'll get into that for a moment. But it's interesting who he calls. He calls, in this story, 4 fishermen, doesn't he? Simon Peter, his brother Andrew, James, and his brother John. Now, I suppose we should get a baseline. How many of you are fishermen? Come on now. Don't be ashamed. Yeah. All right. Thank you. Okay. So there were these 2 fishermen. They went out on the Gulf a little while back. And you know how fishermen are, right? When they get to telling tales. So they were out on the water in the boat. And one of them was talking about the tackle he uses, the kind of bait he likes to use for, when he's fishing for certain kind of fish. And of course they get around to all the fish they've caught. And one fisherman said to the other, "Well, there was that day I was out fishing and I caught a 300-pound salmon. It put up quite a fight." And the other guy goes, "Uh-huh. He said, "Well, I've never caught a 300-pound salmon. That's a pretty good fish." He said, "But I was out on the Gulf one day and my line was out there and I hooked something. And I reeled it up and it was a lantern. And it was a waterproof lantern and it had a tag on it. And it indicated that as you put everything together, that it was lost in 1912. And the guy goes, "Well, that's a pretty good story." He said, "Oh, no." He said, "The interesting thing was it was still lit." The first fisherman looks at him and he says, "Well, all right, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll take 200 pounds off my salmon if you put out your light." I hope I'm not being too harsh on you fellas, With fishermen, you never know what you're going to get. And apparently, Jesus was willing to take a chance on a few of them. As Alicia indicated to us, as he walked beside the Sea of Galilee, He saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net out into the water. And he said to him, "Come follow me." And they left their nets immediately and they followed Jesus. And going on just a little while further, he saw James and John, the sons of Zebedee, and said the same thing to him, "Come follow me." And they left their boat and followed. It's a remarkable story. It's more remarkable when you consider that Jesus calls ordinary people to do extraordinary things. Sometimes I wonder if it wasn't more about who was doing the calling than who was called. I don't know. We've been talking about this in our Bible study, which is 10 o'clock and 2 o'clock on Tuesday, if you'd like to come. We were talking this week about this story, and we're talking about, of all the people, why did Jesus call these fishermen? Why these people? These ordinary blue-collar workers? Of all the people he could have called, why these? And some of the answers were very interesting. They were available. They were open. They were flexible. They were willing to be taught. They were teachable. We had some interesting responses. Personally, I really don't know why Jesus selected them. It would appear that Jesus decided to begin his ministry choosing these people to be with him than to do it alone. Okay. But why these people of all the ones he could have chosen? He didn't choose anybody with special talents. He didn't choose anybody with an impressive track record. Anything remarkable. He did just the opposite. He chose 4 common, everyday fishermen like you and me, ordinary people, and he put within them an extraordinary love. We have to ponder on that a moment, because that might just be the point. Imagine, just truly imagine for a moment all that you might think that God wants to do in this world. What he wants us to do with this time, these opportunities, these gifts and talents. Imagine all the goodness and grace God wants us to help him provide in this world. And he puts it all in the hands of amateurs. That's right. Amateurs, all of us. Wow. I'll bet if we went around the room and took one person at a time, we would all have some pretty serious concerns about the shape of our world. Am I right about that? I mean some serious, cataclysmic concerns about our world. And we know in our heart of hearts that it's not going to be knowledge and wisdom that's going to heal that. We have libraries full of books. And we know as adults that it's not going to be politics and religion. We have enough of those. It's not going to be some new psychology, some new theology. It's not going to be a new philosophy, an economic model, or education. I think we know in our heart of hearts what it's going to take to turn us back from the edge before it's too late. And I think that Jesus knew that. I think he knew that deep in his soul. He knew that there was one thing possible to save this world. And it was calling a few fishermen to go spread his love around this world. People have been coming up to me this week and saying, Jim, I'm trying to understand what my calling is. Because we've been talking about calling lately, haven't we? And they're saying, I'm trying to understand. And I said, well, I'll tell you how it goes for me. My calling is not what you might think it is. This is not my calling. This is what I do. This is what I'm passionate about. But this isn't my calling. You all have spent your lives, you've invested who you are in your careers, in the things that have interested you in Princeton, Evelyn. You've gone places, you've created things, you have designed and patented and built all kinds of marvelous things. But that's not your calling. That's what you've done, how you spent your life. But you know why you were born? You want to know what your real calling in life is? How should I say this? In a way, Pam, your calling is the same as John's calling. It's the same as Evelyn's calling, and Marcia's calling, and Betsy's calling, and Jill's calling. It's what Jesus called fishermen to do, because we can all do the work of love. He called the least remarkable people and put within them an extraordinary love. Remember what I said. We have a rush to the edge. And I have no idea what's ever going to turn us back. But I believe that if we're ever to do it, it will have to do with the fact that we finally recognize what our calling is. Our calling is to share God's love with all the world. Starting right where you are, and going to the next, and the next, and the next. I think that's the reason we were all born. And maybe the fact that Jesus didn't call the best and the brightest, the most connected and talented, was to make the point. You can do it too. You can do it. All of you up there, you can do it too. You guys can do it. We can all love one another. Some time ago, I read a story about a young boy who approached his sister one day and he said, Susie, can anyone ever see God? And she said, no, God's too far away. He goes, oh. He mulled that over a little bit more. Later that day, he went to his mom. He said, Mama, can anybody ever see God? And she said, well, honey, God is spirit. God is all around us and within us, underneath us, above us, in front of us, below us. He thought that was a little better, but he wasn't quite satisfied. And The next day he went fishing with his grandpa. I think his grandpa's name was Papa Jim. He went fishing with Papa Jim, and Papa Jim had been pretty sick lately. He had a serious illness. And that little boy called him every day just to check in with him and see how he was doing. And he would come over as often as he could. So they were out fishing in the boat, and the little boy said to his Papa Jim, he said, "Can anybody ever see God?" And Papa Jim looked at him and said, "Son, there are days that I can't see anything else. You and your calling are to be God's love in this world. And everything rests upon it. That's why we're a church. And that's what we're called to do." Now I'm going to take one more privilege, and I'm going to bow my head one last time. Because this time I'm just simply going to give thanks that as I go about living out my calling, and I'm so grateful to be right beside you all, and that you're my friends, and that we do this calling together. So give me just a moment. May God bless you, and may God bless our dear United Church of Marco Island.